Welcome everyone. Sampling is what we will be talking in today's video. So what is sampling? Sampling is nothing but a process. Remember, this is most important process of selecting a small number of elements from a larger defined targets of element that such that the information gathered from the small groups mimics that properties of the larger groups and allows us to make judgment or come to a decision. So pictographically, if this is a population and probably if I want to take a sample, this might be my sample. Now yes, this is a sample which reflects the true nature of the population that comes around it. So instead of studying the bigger variable, bigger number of population, which might be time consuming, which might be very cost ineffective, can we study the sample and come to an inference of the population? And that is what sampling is all about. Sampling is the process of selecting a small number of elements from a larger defined target groups of elements such that the information gathered from the small group will allow judgments to be made for the larger group. So, what exactly we're trying to talk about it? Look, let's take an example of a country called United States of America. You see the number of population. Is it very big? So what we do is we take something from a sample which comes around here is the number of people which been mentioned out here. If we study this group, and this is what group can be broken down. We can segment this group into a number of segments as in the cards that has been shown around it. So that is what sampling breakdown. Now, if we have studied only a part of the total country and it represent more or less the characteristics of the total country. So question is, what do you want to generalize? What population can you get access to and how can you get access to is what most important. And who is your study? This is what are the question that you need to understand. So what do you want to generalize? The theoretical population of the whole country. What population can you get access to? Probably the study population, because this is in the vicinity. How can you get them access to the sampling frame that comes across it? It might be the demographic can consist of gender, age, economic background, and so on, forth, so forth. And who's your study is the sample number of people, and this is very less when compared to the huge population of the country, perhaps. So sampling is nothing. What have I said about it? The study population and the target population is what we are talking around it. So the target population is this. This is the target population. This is the study population. But here is what we are talking about in terms of the sample, and that would be true for both the study population and the target population. Basics of sampling theories. One is the population. Populations, we try to bring out the elements that we need to study around it. Define the target population then and there. Probably now is the time when we are trying to figure out the sampling unit, the sampling frame thereby. So yes, from populations to elements, elements to the target population, to the sampling unit, to the sampling frame perhaps. There might be cases when your sample does not mimic the exact characteristics of the total population perhaps. So what are the sampling errors that you might encounter? Sampling error is any type of biasness that is attributable to the mistakes in either drawing a sample or determining the sample size thereby. That is what is most important. Developing a sampling plan, define the population of interest. Did I say that full country's population of interest? Identifying a sampling frame if possible. Can we localize it? And this localization should have the metropolitan areas, the urban areas, the rural areas. You have to take everyone into consideration so that it mimics the characteristic of the total target population. Thereby select the sampling method, the sampling size, and execute the sampling plan. And this is how the development of sampling plan comes around here. Right from the population of interest to sampling frame, from sampling frame to the sampling method, from sampling method to the size of the sample, and execution is the most important thing. So let us define all those 5 steps. First and foremost is the population of interest. Population of interest can be entirely depend on the management problem, the problem that you are trying to study, the problem that you are trying to assess, the solution that you want to seek, the research problem, the research design. Some basis for defining population can be geographical areas, can be demographic, can be lifestyle, can be even awareness, education, understanding. So these are the sampling basis for defining a population, be it geographic, demographic, lifestyle, and awareness. Sampling frame, how do we go around a list of population, people, companies, houses, cities that we want to go around it, into which unit can be selected. It is very difficult to get an exact list. Sampling frame error occurs more often than not when certain elements of a population are accidentally omitted or probably are not even included in the list. I would recommend all the audience of this video to go to surveysampling.com. Excellent methods to understand what are the sampling international methods to go around with it. Now we'll talk about the sampling methods, the probability sampling. Now, and the non-probability sampling, or the probability sampling of the sampling method mimicking the characteristic of the total population. Non-probability sampling is where we are doing it by hue and cry, by no choices, by no sequences altogether. We are taking it completely on the go, where the probability sampling we might be sequentially doing it. Did I say in the previous screen where I said the target population need not be only metropolitan population, maybe may has to be urban population and a rural population. That's a probability sampling that we go around to take around it. So yes, certain degree, certain people from urban areas, certain from the rural areas, certain from the metropolitan areas, as the case might be, and that is what we look forward to. Yes, talking about non-probability sampling, this might not be the cases. We are not sequencing anything. It is as on when on basis to the likelihood of coming around here. Types of sampling methods, the probability sampling is a simple random sampling that we keep on seeing around it. Simple random sampling as in metropolitan, urban, rural. Systematic random sampling is what we keep on seeing around it. Stratified random sampling, taking it from after every regular interval. The cluster sampling, from every cluster that we want to go around it. So yes, we have a simple random sampling which is not been planned. Systematic random sampling, we try to define the characteristics of the population and probably take a certain number of sampling from each defined characteristics of the population, the urban, the metro, the metropolitan, or the rural sector. Stratified sampling is after a regular interval that we want to take data from. Cluster sampling is what we love to go in clusters, in lumps altogether. Non-probability sampling is to the requirement convenience of the researcher. Judgment sampling is based on the judgment that we go around it. The quota sampling is exactly nothing but the quota that comes around it. Yes, we have to take it because this represent this percentage of population. Let's say economically weaker section, EWS section people constitute about 20% of the total population. So the sampling should have 20% of economic weakly section. If we have the uber rich people for forming around 20%. So yes, the sampling has to have 20% of their representation. That is what quota sampling is all about. It's snowballing sampling as on when on basis we keep on going around it. If we think we are taking a sampling method and it becomes very easy for us to carry on with the sampling method of data collection, we keep on continuing with it. Simple random sampling is a method of probability sampling in which every unit has equal non-zero chances of being selected. So every unit has equal chances of getting selected for qualifying to be the sample method. Systematic random sampling, on the other hand, is not the probability sampling, but is a method in which the target population is ordered and the sample has been selected. And target population is ordered and sample has been selected. The metropolitan area, the urban population, the rural population, the target population is ordered, and accordingly the position you skip interval. Now, steps in drawing systematic random sampling. First, obtain the list of units that contain the acceptable frame of target population. Did I say about the country called United States of America as a target population? So understand those target population, determine the units. Are we looking at demographic? Are we looking at gender? Are we looking at anything that is specified altogether? For example, economic, for example, based on the skin color. So compute the skip interval. Absolutely determine exactly which characteristics constitute which part of the population, how many part, and based upon it determine the random start point altogether. Begin at the start point, select the units by choosing each unit that correspondent to the skip interval. Stratified sampling is nothing but a method of probability sampling in which population is divided into different groups and subgroups, and samples have been selected from each of the groups of the subgroup perhaps, and that is what stratified random sampling is all about it. Let us go and look into the steps of stratified random sampling. Divide the target population in a homogeneous, similar subgroups or strata, people reflecting into similar groups. Draw random samples from each of the stratum. Now, you are not into a systematic sampling, but random sampling from each stratum. And that is what we look into. Combine the samples of each stratum into a single sample for target population, and that is what stratified random sampling will all be comprising of. Let us talk about the cluster sampling. Cluster sampling is a sampling method used to when natural groupings are evident in a stratified population, in a statistical population, people who are educated, irrespective of the skin color, people who are from a similar background, again, irrespective to their age. We have certain sampling techniques which is completely natural. It is often used in marketing research, divides the population in comparable groups, schools, cities, etc. Cluster sampling is to reduce the average cost per unit. The technique gives more accurate result when the most of the variations in the population is within the group, as the case might be. And that is what cluster sampling is all about it. Non-probability sampling methods, and how do we go about the non-probability method? This is all about convenience, all about pure understanding your compatibility in extracting the data. So convenience plays the most important role regarding your data access and so on and so forth. Judgment sampling relies upon belief that participant fit characteristic. Quota sampling emphasizes representation of specific characteristic, then thereby and as on when on basis. Snowball sampling relies upon the respondent referral of others like characteristics. So you carry on with your non-probability sampling that comes around here. Herein, if you are comfortable with a certain groups, you try to take up as many data as all about it from the similar groups, maybe from similar people you are aware of, people who have been referenced upon, people who are in the same region, people who have an access to. That is snowball sampling. Whereas quota sampling is just an emphasis on the representation of a particular characteristic. Judgment sampling based upon the beliefs of the researcher, their understanding about the participant, about the characteristic, and this might be a sampling error also, or might be right also. So convenience sampling draws at the convenience of the interview. People tend to make selection at a familiar location, definitely at the vicinity of my home. Probably that is what I would like to choose. Choose respondents who are akin to myself, people who are in the similar age bracket, similar outlook. Judgment sample that require judgment or an educated guess on the part of an interviewer as to who should represent the population. Also, judges may be asked to suggest who should be in the sample. Quota sample that set a specific number of certain numbers of interviewers, certain number of individuals. It has to be fit to the certain quota. It has to fulfill that parameters. Snowball sampling is a technique for developing research sample where existing studies of subject recruits future subjects altogether as on when on basis. In fact, they would let them tell it to you as the reference point. So before we wind up, we need to understand the factors considered in sample design, the research objectives. Very important because it will impact the outcomes altogether. If the sample is not correct, your accuracy will be way off. So you need to be perfect with the sampling technique. The resources that it at your disposal, you should always take that into consideration while designing not only the sampling but also the research objective. The time frame is very important for it will make sense to understand how early can you finish it out. The knowledge of the target population is very important. The research scope thereby, the knowledge without the knowledge of the target population, you will not be able to understand the sampling method, the characteristic, whether which one to follow, the random, the stratified, the cluster, the non-probability, and that is what goes around it. The research scopes thereby. Last but not the least is the statistical analytical need, and that will tell it to you about this data that you'll collect through sampling, which might be a representation of the population. The data should always mix fit the statistical analysis. You cannot have different sort of data and different method of statistical analysis, because then it will only create harakiri chaos altogether, and the outcome will not be conducive. With this, I come to an end of this presentation. Thank you for watching this video till the end.